Welcome to the deep dive. You're here, I imagine, because you want to get past the surface noise and really understand things quickly and thoroughly.
Yeah, we take source materials, things people are curious about, and really pull out what matters.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into something pretty unique. The Rhesus negative blood type. But, not just the biology.
No, definitely not. We're going deeper, looking at it through spirituality, symbolism, things like sigils and thought forms.
And also bringing in the perspective of the Urantia papers.
Which is what makes this deep dive, I think, quite different. We're trying to move beyond the standard medical view or, some of the more sensational stuff you see online.
Right. We want to explore the potential for deeper spiritual or philosophical meaning here. How people with this blood type can sort of define themselves.
Define their own significance.
Yeah, precisely. So we've got these essays that look at the Rh negative experience through these symbolic and philosophical lenses.
And the mission today really is to see how Rhesus negative people might use these creative frameworks.
To resist being just a biological label.
Yes, exactly. And instead affirm a kind of spiritual significance in a much bigger cosmic picture.
Okay, sounds like a fascinating journey. Let's get into it.
All right, so first off, let's think about how society tends to categorize us.
Oh, constantly. Medicine, marketing, media, it's all labels.
Right, and this can sometimes miss the mark, maybe overlook someone's individual depths, their spiritual side.
And for Rhesus negative people, it's specific, isn't it?
Hmm.
They're often seen primarily as this biological minority.
Yeah, and one of the sources mentions this kind of strange blend of invisibility and exoticism.
Explain that a bit.
Well, the medical system tracks it, obviously, for things like pregnancy. But then pop culture sometimes spins these wild theories about origins and abilities.
So you're either a data point or some kind of alien hybrid almost.
Sort of. And the point is, these external definitions, whether they're clinical or, really out there.
They often ignore the person's inner life, their own sense of purpose.
Exactly. It's like that one biological detail overshadows everything else, your soul purpose, your internal experience.
It's almost like the identity itself gets commodified, turned into something to be studied or marketed.
Which really reflects a broader trend, doesn't it? How society can treat identity as just another product.
But what if? What if we flip that? Recontextualize it.
How so?
Instead of a biological anomaly, see Rhesus negativity as, well, one source called it a spiritual signature.
A spiritual signature. Interesting. Like a call to live more consciously.
Yeah, maybe an invitation to live with more purpose beyond just the physical classification.
Okay, but to make that shift, you need a different kind of framework, right?
Yeah.
Something bigger than just biology or pop culture.
And that's where the Urantia papers might come in.
Right. For anyone not familiar, these are, they're a pretty dense collection of spiritual and philosophical writings. Very cosmic perspective.
God, the universe, humanity's place. It covers a lot.
It really does. But a key idea for us today is about identity. The Urantia papers suggest our real identity isn't tied up in physical stuff like blood type or race.
It's connected to something else.
To our connection with the divine, with a universal source, our alignment with universal truth and divine will, as the papers put it.
So that completely reframes the idea of being different.
Absolutely. If you're Rhesus negative, this framework shifts you from maybe feeling like you're on the edges of human categories
To being central to a spiritual purpose.
Exactly. The Urantia teaching emphasizes that every single being has this spark, this fragment of the divine inside them.
Regardless of biology.
Regardless. And everyone's destined for this incredible cosmic journey, this ascension. Biological differences just aren't the defining factor in that ultimate sense.
That's a pretty powerful way to reframe things.
It is. So if our core identity goes beyond biology, how do we actually work with that? How do we shape our experience?
This is where thought forms come in. What exactly are those?
Okay, so think of thought forms as like energetic patterns. They're created and fed by repeated thoughts, beliefs, intentions, collective mental energy almost.
So things we hear over and over in the media or social norms.
Exactly. Or brand messages, social fears, they all contribute. And these thought forms aren't just abstract, they actually help shape our shared reality.
And they can lead to feeling alienated or divided.
They certainly can. They can box us in. But here's the crucial part.
They aren't fixed. We can change them.
That's the idea. They can be reshaped. Through awareness, first of all, just
Okay.
noticing them, and then through focused intent, maybe ritual.
Which brings us to sigils. How do they fit into reshaping thought forms?
Well, a sigil is basically a symbol you create yourself. It embodies a specific intention or desire.
Okay.
So in this context, sigils become tools, active tools for building alternative thought forms.
So instead of just absorbing the societal stuff,
Right. A rhesus negative person could, say, create a sigil that affirms their wholeness, their spiritual identity, their connection to the divine.
taking control of the narrative, essentially. So if someone makes a sigil affirming their divine value,
They're actively pushing back against being defined or, commodified by that biological label.
and starting to reshape their own reality, or at least how they experience it.
Precisely. It's about reclaiming that definition. And it's more than just like positive thinking. A sigil is concentrated intent in symbolic form.
Okay.
And when you look at that intent through the Urantia lens, this idea of a spiritual journey, the sigil becomes even more meaningful. It's like a mirror reflecting not just who you are now, but your potential.
Your soul's potential, almost.
You could say that.
Can you give a practical example? What might a sigil like that look like or represent?
Sure. One example from the sources is based on the statement, I am a child of the universe with purpose beyond material labels.
That's pretty clear.
Yeah. So you take that sentence, use a method to turn it into a unique visual symbol.
And then work with it.
Right. Through meditation, putting it somewhere you see it, focusing on it in a ritual way, whatever feels right. The act of engaging with it reinforces that deeper alignment with the cosmic order, with that statement of intent.
Like you're embedding that idea deep within yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the sources also mention something called hypersigils. What's the difference?
Think bigger. A hypersigil isn't just one static symbol. It's more like an ongoing magical narrative.
A narrative, like a story.
Yeah, or maybe a series of paintings, a journal, a performance piece, even a digital project. It unfolds over time, but it's all infused with a core intention.
So for a rhesus negative person, how might that work?
They might weave their own experiences, their feelings about being Rh negative, into a larger story, maybe casting themselves in a kind of cosmic mythos.
Transforming those labels like biological minority into archetypes,
Yeah.
like the seeker or the healer or the guardian, as the sources suggest.
Exactly. It becomes this kind of ritualized storytelling or myth-making with intention. It's not just escapism. It's actively shaping meaning through narrative.
That sounds incredibly creative and empowering.
It can be. And then imagine sharing these hypersigils, maybe in an online group or with friends.
What happens then?
That can create what's called a collective egregore of empowerment.
Egregore. That sounds familiar. Collective thought form?
Kind of, yeah. An egregore is like a thought entity built and sustained by the shared beliefs and emotions of a group. So when people co-create and share these empowering narratives,
They build a collective energy that reinforces that new identity.
precisely, they move from just accepting labels to actively co-creating a new spiritual language, a new set of symbols that reflect their shared truth.
That shared narrative power sounds huge. Now, another angle mentioned was environmental healing. How do sigils connect to that?
Well, the idea explored is that rhesus negative people, perhaps because of this sensitivity to difference we talked about,
Might have a particular empathy for the earth,
yeah,
for its suffering.
potentially, yeah. So creating sigils specifically for planetary healing could be a way for them to channel that empathy into action.
Acting as stewards for the planet.
And reinforcing their own sense of purpose and connection at the same time.
Does this link back to the Urantia papers too?
It does, actually. The papers talk about Earth, or Urantia, as being a bit of a troubled planet, one that's undergoing its own spiritual evolution.
Ah, okay. So engaging in environmental healing through something like sigil work.
Positions these individuals not as marginal figures defined by blood type, but as active co-creators in this larger divine destiny, this planetary evolution.
Right. It shifts the focus outward towards
Yeah.
service.
Exactly. Which brings us back, in a way, to resisting those limiting societal constructs.
Especially in consumer societies where identity gets tied to marketability.
Right. And because rhesus negative is biologically distinct, its uniqueness has unfortunately been sort of commodified.
Right.
You see speculative theories, niche markets popping up.
Trying to capitalize on the perceived difference.
Yeah. And this loops back to egregores, those collective thought forms.
Oh, so?
Well, the sources suggest that capitalist systems, sometimes unintentionally, create these egregores that reinforce the othering of Rh-negative people, making them seem exotic or strange in ways that can be limiting or even exploitative.
So the first step is just recognizing that these forces are at play, these egregores,
Awareness is key, absolutely. Seeing how those collective beliefs might be shaping perception, that diminishes their power.
and then using tools like sigils to actively dismantle them.
Exactly. To consciously replace those limiting thought patterns with ones that reflect a more authentic self-definition rooted in that spiritual identity we discussed.
So creating a sigil in this context becomes, well, one source called it a sacred rebellion.
I like that. A sacred rebellion. It's a declaration of spiritual sovereignty, isn't it?
Yeah. And this ties into the power of narrative again with the hypersigils.
Right. Because with a hypersigil, identity isn't fixed. It's generated through the story as it unfolds.
You embody the archetypes you create.
And by doing that, you potentially influence the collective consciousness too. It's not just internal.
Because everything's interconnected. So personal symbolic acts ripple outward.
That's the underlying belief, yes. So these practices, whether focused on personal empowerment, collective healing, or even environmental restoration.
They all connect internal change to potential external impact.
And the idea is that Rhesus-negative people, perhaps because of that attunement to difference, might be particularly suited to act as catalysts in these kinds of movements.
Spiritual catalysts.
Yeah. And if you weave all this together, the Urantia Papers' view of the soul's ongoing journey,
And the power of focused intention in sigil work.
you end up at this fascinating point of intersection. Co-creation.
Co-creating reality.
In a sense, the soul itself can be seen as a symbol, a vessel carrying intention, constantly learning, evolving, shaping, and being shaped by the universe.
So using these spiritual tools consciously allows Rhesus negative individuals
To embrace their life, their mortality even, not as an endpoint, but as just one part of this vast, evolving consciousness.
moving beyond just surviving in a material world.
To actively shaping their spiritual meaning and their unique place in the cosmos.
Okay. So let's try and summarize the key takeaway here.
I think it's that Rhesus-negative people can use these tools, sigils, understanding thought forms, the Urantia framework, to really reclaim a sense of deep spiritual meaning.
And to push back against being reduced to just a biological label or some kind of marketed curiosity.
Absolutely. It's fundamentally about intentional living, about using symbols and frameworks to affirm their sacred place in the universe.
Going beyond just coping with difference to actually leveraging it for spiritual growth and purpose.
Well put. It's a profound shift in perspective.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Consider this. How might these ideas, symbolic action, spiritual affirmation, reclaiming narrative, apply to anyone who feels marked by some kind of difference?
Yeah, regardless of what that difference is. What personal stories, what symbols could unlock deeper self-understanding for you?
What might hold the key to greater empowerment in a world that often wants to put everyone in neat little boxes? Something to think about.